Okay, then let's have a look at this. This is Littoral Commander Indo-Pacific. This has just been released, published by the Dietz Foundation. There we go, the Dietz Foundation, and designed by Sebastian Bay. This is, you can probably tell from the cover, this is a modern and near future war game covering potential clashes, hypothetical clashes between the US and China in the Indo-Pacific region. That's roughly the area between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, so around the Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, that area, Japan, South China Sea, Taiwan. Here we've got a map of the northern section of the Philippines. This is the Luzon Strait. You've got the South China Sea over there, the Philippine Sea there. This is one of 4 maps that comes in the game, and I'm just setting up a 3-turn scenario called Meeting Engagement. So, yeah, interesting. This Sebastian Bay, you can find some interviews and blog posts by him, design diaries and so on Board Game Geek about the development of this game, and also some very interesting interviews with him done by Mo's Game Table, and I think the Player's Aid as well. But essentially, this was designed as a sort of teaching tool, stroke sandbox, spoke educational tool for the professional military, and then has made it sort of into a commercial format, which I've got here, recently come out. So yeah, a different or slightly unusual inception for a commercial war game. And it has some quite distinctive features, so I'm going to have a little bit of a chat about those as I'm getting set up, and then get into some play. It's like I say, the scenarios of this game are pretty short, 3 turns, 5, 7 turns. It's designed to be played in a couple of hours, and that looks very reasonable. So let's have a look at some of the things that, I won't say unique, but some of the things that make it distinctive, and then we'll go from there. So yeah, I've got unit cards. Each unit on the map has a card down the side. We've got the US down here. We're going to have 6 units. The Chinese forces down here, 6 units. So in the process of setup, so you'll have to forgive me a little bit for wandering around. So distinctive things about this game then. The first is really the scale of the map scale, the scale of the terrain compared with the unit size is quite unusual. This map is 20 kilometers per hex, color-coded hexes, just to make it really nice and simple. A few features on them, like cities and airports and ports, but color-coded hex map. 20 kilometers per hex. By contrast, or by way of illustration, the Next War series, which would be very close to this in topic, say Next War Taiwan, I think is 7.5 kilometers per hex. If you looked at another operational game like the Thin Red Line, Deadly Northern Lights, that series, Under an Iron Sky, that's 14 kilometers per hex. And those are big top-level operational games with battalions and brigades, divisions, that size of force, and usually, a ship counter might be 8 destroyers or frigates or whatever. Here the units, that's an infantry platoon. An infantry platoon, that's like 40 guys on a 20 kilometer hex, and you've got 6 units. So the destroyer down here is a single destroyer. There's an Arleigh class guided missile destroyer here. That's a single unit. So that's describing something quite unusual in itself, to be using platoon scale units on a 20 kilometer per hex map. Just by way of illustration, you'd put 3 counters down to represent a platoon in Lock and Load Tactical, and that's a 50 meter per hex map. So there's some interesting things being described here. We're not talking clearly about occupation of territory. We're talking about small units of manpower using very sophisticated equipment, very sophisticated comms, very sophisticated computer equipment, and very sophisticated arms and armament to do very targeted and precise things. We're not talking about thousands of guys milling about occupying space. So that is quite descriptive of the kind of battles that are being fought in and of itself. I think that's really fun. So I mentioned Lock and Load Tactical. Another one of the defining features of that system is things are hidden or not, and they're visible or not. And a lot of the action in that game revolves around choosing your actions and choosing whether it's worth becoming spotted by, for example, firing, and looking at the kind of return fire you might take as a consequence of that. And you get these firefights break out where something decides to fire, and then now things can see that and fire at it, and then those things become spotted, and you get this chain reaction of fire and stuff across the board. Or you end up with very sneaky kind of, what can I do to stay hidden and minimise the risk kind of moves, and then an interplay of, do I waste my time, or do I potentially waste my time trying to spot and then becoming complete blah blah blah. So this infantry platoon, if we look at it, you can have a look at the numbers on the front, but the rear side is simply a generic US marker, and so you are generic US marker until you are spotted, and then you're on this side, and you can only fire at stuff if it's on this side. So while things remain unspotted, they can't be shot at. And we'll see that the firepower in this game is such that you really don't want to be spotted. So a lot of the game, like Lock and Load Tactical, seems to be about information and about whether you can find stuff and pinpoint it such that you can fire at it, but on an operational scale map rather than on a tactical scale map. So that's cool. Let's not, I'm not pretending that that's never been done before. We could go back to things like Mark Herman's Pacific War to find a game that's all about the cat and mouse of finding the enemy before they find you. So from the mid 80s or early 80s, whenever that was, 84, 85, whenever Pacific War first came out. But here it is, implemented again, an operational game with hidden, whether you're hidden or located or spotted or whatever, being a very key component. Okay, let's have a look at these cards. These cards, each unit has its own card, and these cards are predominantly used to track supply. So this infantry platoon, also your hit points, how the black will be hit points, and then you can see it's got red and green and values up here, and then it's got green and red spots, and we're going to use little coloured cubes to track its hit points and its red supply and its green supply. And essentially you get a dice to roll for each supply you spend. So they've got a maximum of 1 supply in red, which is long range strikes, so 6 combat, 9 range, and they can have 1 dice because they've only ever got 1 supply. But in close combat, in ground assault, 6 dice, no range, so it's got to be same hex. 6 combat value, no range, but up to 5 supply, which means that they could choose to roll up to 5 dice, because you can spend a dice per supply, and you can just alpha strike with everything you've got, or you can decide to hold some back. You can do whatever you like in terms of announcing the amount of supply you're going to spend. So that's what these cards do. And as we move down, we can see an ACV section here again with up to 5 supply for ground assault on 8s. I should explain those values. Very simple. You roll under that number on a d20 to do a point of damage. So 2 hit points. You're fighting something with 2 hit points. You're trying to roll under 8s on a d20, so a 40% chance. You have a look at how many dice you want to spend and go from there. So very clearly, on average, if you spent 5 dice with a 40% chance, you're likely to get 2 hits, which would knock another unit out but leave you completely out of supply, and so on. 2 dice for this armed vehicle section. For its long range strikes, 9 range, and 2 hit points, and so on. We've got a thing here called a HIMARS section. That's our guided rocket artillery, and you can see 2 red values. So those are long range strikes, either range 4 or range 9, rolling under 10s or 12s. And they have, because they've got 2 red, they use 2 slightly different coloured cubes. So the 10-4 is represented by this 6 supply, and the 12-9 by this orange 3 supply, 2 hit points. And then long range strike can be defended against by intercept, and that's showing as kind of black on the camera, but you'll have to trust me when I say it's purple. And those purple values, you can negate hits from long range strikes by rolling intercept, and again you spend your supply, you roll under that, and then each one negates a hit from a long range strike. So it can do point defense on 6s, and it can do range 4 intercepts on 13s. Interestingly, this only appears to have 1 supply value, and that's because its 6-0 point defense has infinite supply. That doesn't mean you can roll infinite dice. If you have infinite supply, you can roll a maximum of 4 dice. But it's got 10 supply for its much more effective 13-4. Only once you run out of that would you be rolling 4 dice on 6s. I would hazard a guess. We've got a supply unit down here that does that resupplies, strangely enough, other units. The supply from a supply unit can count as any colour cube you like, and this thing can supply at range 6 up to 2 cubes, or at range 3 up to 6 cubes. And it has a total of 20 supply to distribute. And we have an Arleigh Burke class destroyer down here with 2 hit points and 10 long range strike and 10 intercept, all on 14s. Very, very dangerous indeed. So that's how the units are described in this game. Pretty simple, but actually really clean. And then the last thing to talk about is these cards here. Either side has decks of cards, and these cards represent additional capabilities for your forces. They can be one-off events, they can be permanent things, they can be attached to individual units to give them supplementary capabilities. They can be all kinds of things. I've arranged these by colour because they are colour-coded, but for example, we could have some space satellites which do a whole load of stuff, and you can see a permanent infinity icon there means that these would be permanently put into play. We could have an attacking AI which would have a one-off effect to nullify other cards. We could have an attack on command and control, which would be some sort of information attack, which would choose one, nullify other stuff. But equally, we could have some seaplanes, or we can have maritime, we can have tomahawk strikes. There's loads of stuff in here. And each side's got about 110 cards. There are some duplicates, but this allows us to sort of customize the forces in play such that we can have surveillance drones attached to our infantry platoons. We can have unmanned armoured vehicles. We can have combat air patrol covering our positions. We can have satellites. We can have anti-satellite ballistic missiles. We can have all kinds of toys, all represented by these cards. We can also have hacking attempts and propaganda attempts, and a whole myriad of stuff represented by these decks. And the Chinese have got one over here, and they are asymmetrical. They're not the same thing at all, as are the forces. I'm going to set the game up with the cards that the scenario gives each side, and I don't know if I showed you, but cards also have a cost in the top left there. So for example, these unmanned underwater subs would cost 1 point, and in this scenario both sides have got 6 points to spend. So they've got some cards allocated to them at the beginning, And then they've also got 6 points worth to spend. So that's a fairly lengthy ramble about this. I will now carry on with setting up the two sides, and then what I'm going to do, because the game is played with all these hidden units and so on, is look at stuff purely from the US point of view, because they start the game with the initiative, and we'll see what we know as the US player, and we'll see what options we've got with the cards and forces we've got available. Okay then, Littoral Commander. We have the first scenario here called Meeting Engagement Set Up. We've got some US blue forces all hidden. We have some Chinese PLA forces all hidden. And we have cards in play for the US side. We have all our unit cards set up here with all our supply marked and hit points marked on them, and we have our hand of cards over here to play, which I've got face up for the sake of having a look at our options. And over there, similarly, we've got the Chinese hand down there, their forces set up along there with the cards that they start with, the ones they've bought, and the cards that they've got in play. Let's have a look at what we've got then. We have got a tactical network card which represents the state of our electronic systems, our communication systems, our computer systems in a abstract sense, and every red cube on it represents some sort of degradation of our capabilities, and the scenario says it starts with 1 red cube. We can read on that card that if it gets to 2 red cubes or 3 red cubes, then we reduce all our long-range strike and our intercept, which is our purple values to prevent long-range strikes, by 4, which is bad. If it gets to 4 red cubes, we reduce them by 7. That's really bad. So you can see that hacking and electronic warfare can have significant impact. We can reduce red cubes by spending an action. We can take 2 off by spending an action, and we'll get to actions in a bit. We also have some combat air patrols down. All the icons down here say that they're permanent, the infinity icon, that they can be intercepted by fighters, the fighter icon, that they can be shot down by intercept, the rocket sort of artillery icon, and that they can perform nullify actions themselves. That's the sort of stop sign icon. Great. There's lots of text on there explaining how they work, which I'm not going to go into. Suffice to say that we have some combat air patrols in the skies above us. Okay, so we've got an infantry platoon. It has some unmanned ground vehicles which can be activated, but they're not active at the moment. We have an amphibious combat vehicle section. We have a rocket artillery section with 2 different types of ammo and an attached V-BAT, which is some sort of flying reconnaissance drone thing that we can activate on it. We have our intercept capability. We have our 20 supply points to restock people's supply, and we have our Arleigh class destroyer, which I've forgotten to put a red cube on. It should have a red 10 as well as that purple 10, so it's got 10 supply for both attack and defence, essentially, which is a lot when you're hitting on 14s on a D20, a 70% hit chance. You can see that if we alpha striked with 10 attack, we would average 7 hits on something, and unless they had some fairly robust intercept capability, that's likely to take the 2 hit points off that we need to destroy something. So like I was saying, the firepower on the board, especially from these things, will destroy pretty much anything unless you can defend yourselves or not be seen to be shot at in the first place. So Over here we've got some cards. So these are the two cards I bought with our 6 points. These are two that the scenario gave us. This is gives us the opportunity to insert some special forces, a special forces unit anywhere on the map, but it can be intercepted by enemy fighters, so we have to be careful not to get shot down before we do that. This is a tactical cyber attack that will do two things. It will help us reveal enemy units on the map, and if it's successful it will also put a red cube on the enemy tactical network. Fab. So I bought these two cards. This is another unmanned sort of surveillance drone, which can reveal units and add 4 to our long-range strike value against them, or it can add cubes to the network, the enemy network. So it has sort of multiple uses here, but you can see it can be intercepted by fighters, shot down by intercept values, and so on. So we have to work out how to keep that protected. And I bought some B-2 bombers. Why did I buy these? Well, this thing can reveal things in units in any 2 adjacent hexes, and this thing can attack things in 2 adjacent hexes, so that looked like fun. It's very hard to detect for enemy fighters, so it's sort of a standalone strike, and with a 3-turn game I decided that we wanted stuff that could be immediately very effective without revealing my ground forces, and I will get into that thinking in a second. So I thought these two cards might work quite nicely together, in that our unmanned MUX could reveal some hexes, and then our B-2 bomber could come in and try and flatten what was in them. And I thought that would be an interesting way to had interesting potential to start the game without revealing too much of our disposition or our future plans. So there's that. So those are our cards that we've got available. So let's talk about the sort of tactical situation. We obviously don't know the layout of or disposition of the enemy forces. We could make some educated guesses that we know that they've got some mechanised infantry and some light tank platoons, and we could guess that they'll be somewhere up front in this lot, and that their supply and their artillery will be somewhere towards the back, but we don't know what's what. What we do know is that somewhere out there is a guided missile destroyer of the Chinese Navy, a Type 55, and we know that they've got 16 supply for their long-range strikes, hitting on 14s, and that's going to average, we talked about the Arleigh Burke averaging 7 hits with its ammo, that's averaging 11 hits, and we have got nothing at all that can defend. That's 11 average hits. I mean, obviously it could put 16 hits in if it rolled, well, but it will average 11 hits, and we have got nothing that will reliably defend 11 hits. Not even the Arleigh Burke class DDG can reliably prevent 11 hits. If we fire all our intercept, 10 shots of intercept at 70%, we'd stop 7 of them on average and still be sunk. So if that thing finds us, it can kill us. That is the takeaway message at the start of the game. And so all our decision making, I would suggest, has to include the idea that whatever we reveal can be destroyed the moment it's revealed by that destroyer. So, that's what we've got to think about. The way the game is played, both sides' forces are divided up into essentially 2 task forces. These 3 units here and these 3 units here. So on the American side, they're divided up. We've got the infantry to platoon, the armoured combat vehicles, and the artillery in one task force, and the intercept, the supply, logistics, and the destroyer in our second task force. And the Chinese are divided up slightly differently. They've got 2 ground combat units and their intercept unit, and then they've got their artillery, their resupply, and their destroyer stroke cruiser in another task force. Either way, what's going to happen is that we are going to pick a task force to activate, and they will get 3 action points, and then the Chinese will do the same, the opposite side will do the same, then we will do the same, and then the other side will do the same. So we will task force, one of ours, one of theirs. We will alternate backwards and forwards. When you activate a task force, you get 3 action points, and you can spend them to move and fight, move and resupply, move and conceal. If you've been spotted, you can move and hide and reconceal yourself, or you can play a card or activate an already played card. When I say activate an already played card, that's a one-time thing, but you can activate a card. So, for example, these combat air patrols start in play, so we get to use them for free once per turn. You can do something with them, but these unmanned ground vehicles require an action point to be put into play, and from then on they would just be automatically in play. Similarly with this VBAT, 1 action point to use it. After that, it's in play. We can look along the Chinese line and we can see attachments to pretty much all of their units. So they have gone heavy on the on the attachments to upgrade their ground troops, and far less stuff in hand over there. Interesting. All right. So what can we do to start the game? Because it's our turn. We've got to decide which of our 2 task forces to activate, and we've got to decide how to spend our 3 action points. Let's have a look at some of our options then. We could put the MUX into play, and that would then, for 1 action point, and that would allow us to make a roll to try and reveal some enemy units on the map with a +4 LRS value. That would be great. The trouble with this is that it says enemy fighter nullify and IAMD intercept must first roll 1 to 16 to detect. Well, 1 to 16 is a pretty easy roll to make, and so the enemy, the Chinese combat air patrol, would only need to roll 1 to 16 to have a chance to detect this, and then would make their roll, which for their planes is 1 to 12, to shoot it down. So we could try and put that into play, but the Chinese cap would likely have a lot to say about that. We could then try and nullify the Chinese cap with our own combat air patrols, but the detection on fighters on both sides is very low. In other words, these fighters that we're playing with need a 1 to 6 to detect, and the Chinese are even scarier than that, and I think it's a 1 to 5 to detect their fighters. So we'd only have a 25% chance of intercepting their fighters and therefore protecting our MUX. But we could do that. That's another of our options. We could fly our combat air patrols at the Chinese combat air patrols and see if we could nullify them in some way, and then use that knowledge to try and put our MUX into action. And then if that was successful and then we revealed 2 enemy hexes, we could then play our B-2 bombers to try and bomb them. So that is a kind of chain of plan that we could think about. So combat air patrols as a free action to try and nullify their combat air patrols. MUX into play to try and surveil the enemy positions. Then the B-2 bombers, that would be 2 action points. And then we could, for example, play our tactical cyber attack as another action to try and reveal some more enemy forces. Or we could spend an action point maybe to get our infantry platoon properly equipped with its unmanned ground vehicles. All those kinds of things are possible. A tactical note, or thinking, tactical note, a couple of tactical notes really to think about. Our advantages in this scenario, one of them is that we have 20 supply on a logistics company. The Chinese only have a logistics platoon with 7 supply on it, and ours can churn out 6 supply a turn, and theirs can only churn out 2. So we can restock everything apart from our destroyer. We can't resupply that, but all of our ground units can be resupplied, which means we can fire off like loads of shots from our HIMARS. Like we could fire 6 shots out of our HIMARS and try and flatten things, and then give it 6 more. That isn't an option that the Chinese ground forces have. Having said that, the Chinese look like they've bolstered their ground forces quite significantly, so maybe that isn't as much of an advantage as it appears. We certainly can outsupply them, but whether they've got more in the locker because of all their attached capability cards remains to be seen. Another tactical note: when you want to roll intercept, the purple intercept, you have to be closer to the unit you're defending than the firer. So if they're adjacent and you're 3 hexes away, too bad, you can't intercept, because you're intercepting rockets, just don't get there in time. The enemy unit, you just have to take the hit. Now the layout here is such that our entire ground force, with the exception of this unit, falls under the protective umbrella of our Arleigh Burke class destroyer. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hexes out here, and that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 from the Chinese destroyer. So were the Chinese destroyer to fire at anything other than this, we could use our destroyer to intercept the attack, and we also have an intercept MRI-C section with lots of supply, 10 supply in here. So an attack against our ground forces right now, apart from this unit here, could be intercepted by our destroyer. And actually we've got 10 supply on our MRI-C section, so we are currently as well defended as we can be against that destroyer. The reverse is not true of the Chinese forces. You can see that we as a group are within 3 or 4 hexes, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or so, and even our destroyer is within strike range, and their destroyer is not within defense range. So the layout here with the destroyers on opposite sides is also a tactical advantage for us, because we have both attack and defense, and they only have really attack. Although we've pointed to the difference in attack capabilities, and that destroyer is still extremely potent as an attacking force. But its defensive capabilities cannot come into play to help the Chinese ground forces. Where does that leave us? I'm thinking this through. If we activate our ground force, because another option would be to charge forward with our infantry and our ACVs, which are at the front here, move forward. When you're adjacent to enemy units and you're moving, you can, it's called zones of reconnaissance, you get a free reconnaissance into 1 hex during or at the end of your move. So we could move forward, we could do some recon, and from there we could, attack with a long-range strike, or we could move into the hex and initiate ground combat. So those are options. The scenario, however, starts you with 2 less supply for ground assault. So instead of 5 supply, this infantry platoon has 3 of the green supply, and this ACV section has 3 as well instead of its normal 5. And obviously our unmanned ground vehicles aren't in operation yet, and we'd want them to be before we did that. And the other problem with that plan is that as we moved in and revealed ourselves, we would then open up ourselves to potential extremely unpleasant attacks from that destroyer. It's not looking super compelling, but it's an option. and we could try and put this VBAT into play. We could. This is another option. We could try and this allows us to put a separate marker on the board which represents this sort of unmanned drone, and it can move 3 hexes per turn, and it reveals enemy units that fly over it, but it is subject to interception, not to fighters. Fighters won't shoot it down, but enemy intercept will shoot it down. But that would be interesting in that if the enemy wanted to intercept it, they would have to fire and therefore reveal their intercept unit, and that intercept unit would then be open to fire from our HIMARS and our Arleigh Burke class. So there's a back and forth. You can see that we want to look for moves that will provoke or force some sort of response. I'm going to have a little bit of a think about that, and I've talked now for another 20 minutes, so I'm going to have a little think about that and come back. Okay, well, I came up with this initial plan to use our tactical cyber attack. It said on a roll of 1 to 12, all units in 1 hex are revealed and cannot conduct actions for this turn, including any defensive intercepts. And I thought, fantastic. We'll play this on the hex with the Chinese destroyer, ballistic missile destroyer. We'll paralyse its intercept capability, and then we'll blow it up before it can be any threat to us. Unfortunately, I rolled a 19. So that has now been played and has no effect. So that's going into our discards. And to execute this plan, I had to activate this task force because I wanted to use all the missile capability on our own Arleigh Burke to destroy the enemy destroyer. And so, yes, we've now got this section activated. We've used an action point and we've not achieved anything. We've got 2 action points remaining, and I've got some decisions to make. I'm tempted to use the Marine company to do a resupply action and at least get our infantry platoon and ACV section up to full strength in terms of supply. But the other thing I could do is try and go back to this plan with our combat air patrols, try and knock out the enemy combat air patrols, then put the MUX into play and go for the B-2 bombers. That's an alternate action, plan of action. I think I'm going to go for that one. It's a bit more active. The resupply is quite passive. So we're going to go there. Let's throw our combat air patrols to try and nullify the enemy combat air patrols. Do they want to fly combat air patrol against us? And we'll have the 2 fly off against each other. The answer is yes, they do. Or do they? Because we only find them on a 1 to 5. Whether they fly against us or not, the only thing they won't get is a shot at us, but they need a 1 to 6 to do that. No, actually, they're going to hold their combat air patrols back and just let us come at them. So we're going to roll to detect, and we've got an 8, which does not detect them. So our combat air patrols are flipped. This isn't going particularly well, as you can see. So now we probably don't want to put our MUX into play because they've got the capability to shoot them down. We've not got a target now for our B-2 bomber. We've got 2 action points still to go. This is tricky. So I will use the logistical company and spend 4 points from here and activate our resupply our 2 our ACV section and our infantry platoon using a resupply action. But we've now got 1 action point to spend and no really good way to spend it. So I think what we're going to do for shits and giggles is try and put our special operations forces into play, and we're going to try and drop them into this hex. And hope for the best. So this says place a blue SOF marker on any land hex. It can engage in defensive ground assault combat with 2 dice. Oh, it hit on 1 to 6s and it has 1 hit point. Okay, we're going to do that. Yeah. In fact, we're going to put them behind enemy lines. Fuck it, why put them right into something strong? Let's put them in this hex. We don't know what's in this hex, but let's drop them in there anyway. So that's our third action. And I think, given that that can be intercepted by the fighters, they will try fight another fight on that. They succeed on 1 to 12s, as it says that on their card. They've got a 19, failed to intercept our action. They're flipped, and I'm putting a special forces marker in here. And then we're going on to the Chinese turn.